We are here to tell you about a brand new resource that's available. Erica's going to tell you what it is.
Shaped by God's Promises, Lessons from Sarah on Fear and Faith by Shannon Popkin. It's a 6-week Bible study. I did it by myself for devotions for 6 weeks, and it was great. I have studied the book of Genesis. We've done Genesis on this podcast. I've sat in your Bible study. But to have someone dive in for 6 weeks on Sarah's life, she brought out concepts, questions, things I have never considered. Because how often, honestly, do we study just Sarah?
You don't.
You
always
don't.
look at Abraham.
Yeah. And so obviously Abraham's a part of it and Hagar, but she's really focusing on Sarah. And the questions she asked were very convicting and challenging, but encouraging. It really made me wrestle with some stuff. So we highly recommend.
Right. So check it out. Shannon Popkin's book.
Yep.
Shaped by God's Promises.
Yep.
Okay. Bye.
Do you ever want to dive deeper into the Bible, but you just don't know where to begin or struggle to even feel like you have the time? When you read the Bible, do you get frustrated because you know there is so much more in there? You just have no clue how to get it out. Or maybe you just want to know the Bible better and you're looking for any resource to help. Well, then this is the podcast for you. Welcome to the Context and Color of the Bible podcast. We are two sisters.
I'm Veronica.
I'm Erica. We love to study the Bible better, and we love to study the Bible and help others understand it better.
I didn't even catch
Yeah, I did. When it comes to our own study of Scripture, we have found that in bringing back the context of Scripture, it adds to our understanding. It actually adds color to the black and white pages of the text. Once again, Veronica, we show that we do not pre-record these things.
No, we don't. It also shows I don't listen to you when you're talking. I know.
You got to mix it up so people like.
I know. Make it enjoyable. I know, because truthfully, those that do have the pre-recorded intro,
I fast forward.
I do too. So
We have to put some good nuggets maybe in the intro.
I know. Little Easter eggs.
Yeah. Oh.
How do you do that with sound? I don't know. But we are here. We're going to jump right back into chapter 4. Bryan was flying last week. He got through 8 verses.
Yeah.
So, which actually, though, I do, because I was saying to my friend Laura, I'm like, I think we're going to divide all of Micah up, because in real time, we haven't yet till now. And she's like, well, you can listen to Bryan Van on double speed. And so it takes those 50-minute
I'm so
sermons.
slow.
And I'm like, that is kind of true. But it's also not just speaking speed, but it's also like you give so much information, though.
Right.
You don't want to speed through it. You need time to process and think because you're making so many connections.
Right.
So even if I can have you do it in 20 minutes, that's like drinking from a fire hose.
I do what I can.
I know. So we don't have to do that. So
Yeah.
in real time, we're coming back now and breaking some of these
I
up.
know. In real time, I'm like, what are we doing? Which chapter?
You know, because next we're doing chapter 6.
Okay. We will get
makes
this.
sense.
We will get
Yes.
So we're halfway through chapter 4, at least through structure. The first half of chapter 4 was in the last days. We fast, like from Micah's day, suddenly we fast forward almost to the end of our timeline as we know it, and got a picture for like where God is moving history. But now as we move into verse 9 through the end of chapter 4, Micah's like bringing us back closer to his own time, not current. You know, in chapters 1, 2, and 3, he's talking to his audience saying, you guys got to get straight. We've got to make changes. But now here in chapter 4, it's like, okay, but in the near future, here are some things that we can expect. Near future could be some years, maybe decades, maybe even a few centuries from Micah's time, but not the last
Not the back.
days.
Not the back of the days.
Back of days, yeah.
Okay.
So he's saying, like, now, why do you cry aloud? Okay, remember, we're in the first half of chapter 4, we talked about the nations in the last days and then Israel in the last days. Now we're moving into Israel in the immediate future, and then we're going to talk about the nations in the immediate future. So he's still talking to Israel, but now he's changed his timetable. why do you cry aloud, you Israel, you Lady Jerusalem? Why do you cry aloud? Have you no king? Well, we just talked about where the kingship is ultimately going to be. But in the moment or in the near future, have you no king? Has your counselor perished? The king was supposed to be the wise one that you would consult for, your wisdom and your decisions. And he says, well, that pain is seizing you like a woman in labor. And that's playing into this concept we've talked about where Micah is picturing Jerusalem as a woman. She's representing the nation. And Lady Samaria in chapter 1. We're kind of bringing back that picture. Lady Jerusalem, why are you now struggling? It's like a pain is starting to seize her, a pain almost like childbirth. Verse 10, writhe and groan like a woman in labor, daughter of Zion. And this pain is going to be that you're going to go out from the city and you're going to dwell in an open country going to Babylon. So all these pictures of exile. We've seen the pictures of exile in chapter 1. There were the breadcrumbs of an invasion coming and those different keywords and the animal sounds of chapter 1 of people going out into exile. Well, that pain seems to be encroaching upon Lady Jerusalem. It already happened to her sister, and it's coming, even potentially for Lady Jerusalem. So, what's going on here? We talked about the coming king, but in Micah's day, the king that had failed. The king was a failed role. It didn't live up to David as a man after God's own heart. David had his issues. Solomon then
Really
got worse,
issues.
and it just kind of tailspin. And there were some good kings and some kings that were really, really bad. But for the most part, that role had been a failure. It hadn't held up to what it was intended to be. And so because of that, the nation was going to start to suffer because the king hadn't held the nation accountable. The king hadn't led. That meant sin and everything was just kind of emanating out, trickling down. And then consequences were going to come.
Which is the exact opposite of what we ended with last week, talking about the king being a good, just king, so Israel will be like her king in those back of the days time frames. So you've almost got contrast kind of going of when a good king is on the throne, Israel will
prosper.
Yep.
and do right. When a bad king's on the throne, Israel will follow that lead and be not good.
Right. And this does have connections to the Jacob story we talked about last week, where, again, Jacob coming back from his exile in the east, God's bringing this misfit. That pattern overlays here because what had happened shortly after Jacob comes back into the land, well, he's sojourning and makes his way, and then Rachel, his favored wife, starts going into labor pains with Benjamin. And so I think there's breadcrumbs there where we're tying into that story.
Okay.
Because Rachel's now starting. Rachel,
to prep for chapter 5 then with
and
Rachel.
chapter 5 of a son is born.
Okay.
Who brings hope. Now, I know it's Benjamin and not Judah, but Micah and God, they're using pictures and stories from past events to help bring added punch and definition to their prophecies.
Just brings more layers and more meaning.
Yeah.
A picture is worth 1,000 words, and God uses that so much in Scripture to add to it.
Yeah. So you can kind of take that story and overlay it here and see that's an interesting, and it helps me understand what Micah's trying to communicate. And so Lady Jerusalem is starting to undergo these labor pains, these birth pains that are coming. And the reality on the ground is that Micah's saying, these labor pains are pains that are going to result in exile. But, and here's where you're like, this is part of the hope section in this part. The second half of verse 10, in exile, you're going to Babylon. There you shall be rescued. There the Lord will redeem you out of the hand of your enemies. So it's a mixture. Like it's not all sunshine and roses. Mm-hmm. There's consequences that have to be paid because of the character of the nation and what's happened. But they're not going to be left there. And that's where the hope is. This, just like in labor, it's building and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Like you just...
It's coming.
Yeah, it's coming and it's becoming more intense. Mm-hmm. But then God's saying the consequences will be paid and then I'm going to come redeem you. Mm-hmm. And the Hebrew word Gaal is a key word in...
Can you spell that?
Gaal. Gaal.
Oh, okay.
Redeemer. You see that a lot in the book of Ruth. One of the key roles of a redeemer is to buy back family that has been lost or sold into slavery or kidnapped. Like they're to come and redeem them. And God's saying, I am that redeemer and I will even rescue you when you're off in a foreign land. Because of your own choices, these things are going to take place, but I'm going to come get you.
Because God clearly laid it out in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Here's the consequences. When you disobey, you will go into exile. But because of his covenant, go to Genesis, then his covenant with Abraham, they can't be completely gone forever.
Yeah. So God's covenant promises remain intact. Those promises include the punishments, but they also include that I'm never going to leave you.
Ultimate redemption.
And there will be ultimately redemption, even if you're exiled off into a foreign land. You're not too far away.
Which is how big God is. You can be complete, because those gods, Canaanite gods, were territorial, local to their own little cities or
jurisdictions.
Yeah, and to go, God is so much bigger than them. You can be taken to the ends of the earth, and I still can get you. Which then you kind of go real quick, jumping a book ahead before Micah, you can try to run to the ends of the earth and I can still find you.
Yeah. Or even to the depths of the sea. Yep. And the last point here is just like labor pains, it won't last forever. And I see that there is a joy that comes even after that. It is interesting that he used that kind of picture for the pain, the suffering that was going to come, as opposed to different types of pain that he could have used.
Right.
I think part of it's hooking into the Jacob and Rachel story, but part of it too is labor pains are just a different, it's a different kind of
Was
pain.
labor hard on you, Bryan?
It was very hard. My hand still has not recovered from the squeezing that it got.
I am so keeping my mouth shut right now. Just not going to say a word, as I have borne 6 children for you.
And my finger still doesn't click the mouse like it used to.
He'll be sleeping on the couch tonight. I just want everyone to know.
Funny. But it is interesting. God picks.
Labor is a pain that's bound
to the curse. Now we're going back to Genesis.
No, to a specific time. It's not like an ongoing pain.
It's temporary.
Like you break,
you give birth to something.
Like when you break your kneecap, and every time
he's really hitting Erica from all angles.
Yep, give her the mic.
You are really, really gonna love that couch tonight, aren't you?
All right, so explain.
I broke my kneecap.
No, the difference between like a permanent injury versus
I guess
and
it's
how does
true.
that shed light on this?
I mean, so many of our listeners right now are probably ready to like smack you because they all understand a labor pain starts light, but it gets very intense. But you know what's coming. You know it's not going to last forever.
It's worth it.
It's worth it when you have that baby in your arms. But like when I broke my kneecap, it wasn't worth it. There was nothing good coming from this. And it hurt until it was fixed.
And still hurts.
And it still bothers me. Yes, I can't run
And maybe that's
because of it. But
now that I think about it, it's kind of the difference between the lame Jacob kind of picture from the previous teaching and this. I don't know. Interesting. Interesting connection.
But the upshot is labor was really hard on you.
It was.
I was just about to say I forgive you and you can be back in the bedroom tonight, but
Cooler downstairs.
So the Lord will redeem Israel. And then verse 11, 12, and 13 switches. Still, we're still in that same time zone. But now many nations are assembled against you. So the subject is the nations. We're still talking to Israel, Lady Jerusalem. You can still picture Lady Jerusalem. Picture she's going into these labor pains. They're becoming more intense. How vulnerable would, a woman, especially in the ancient world, here you can pop into your car or go to the hospital, but like in the ancient world, she's undergoing these labor pains. She's starting to struggle. She's vulnerable. And we see now the nations are assembled against. They're saying, let her be defiled. Let her eyes gaze upon Zion. So the nations, again, this is the mixed bag. We're still in an overarching hope movement, but there's consequences. There's a little bit of messiness here that God still will work through, even though he will bring hope out on the backside of it. And, the exile, the hostility, the nations are coming, they're gathering to kind of gawk and leer at Israel. And I think underneath it are all the nasty things that you would kind of picture that these words are pointing at. A vulnerable woman who's going through her own difficulties, that they're coming to like take advantage.
Which she is the most vulnerable. I mean, in labor, you are the most vulnerable. You cannot move. You cannot run. You cannot defend yourself.
Yeah.
You are easy pickings.
And that's exactly what is being described here. And again, we're using this picture of a woman, but this is the nation. The nation's being talked about, the nation represented by Lady Jerusalem. And she's vulnerable. And she's in this position because of her own sinfulness and the failed leadership.
Right.
And this is what's happening and about to happen. And again, in the near future, and this great pivot though, but they do not know the thoughts of the Lord. The nations are coming for their own intentions and what they think they're going to do. But God says they don't understand my plan, because the camera zooms back. Like we see a vulnerable woman hunched over, suffering, and like these bullies, and like think of the gang surrounding this woman, and that's all you see. But let's zoom the camera back so that this group is just a tiny little group in the center of the screen. Now we see that God's actually gathered them. The way that in the ancient world they would gather the sheaves of grain to the threshing floor. They thought they came of their own volition to kind of take advantage of Lady Jerusalem. But when we see the big picture, we see, no, God actually gathered you as sheaves to the threshing floor. And what happens to sheaves at the threshing floor?
They probably get cut down. I don't know.
They get beat.
Okay.
Beat hard.
I haven't threshed anything lately.
So in the ancient world, you would imagine a parking lot.
Okay.
You have a hard, flat surface, and out in the fields, you're right, the grain gets cut, and then they're gathered with the stalks and the grain at the end, and they're brought to the threshing floor, and there you beat the grain to separate the kernels from the chaff. And then the winnowing process is you're kind of tossing the chaff up in the air, and then the chaff blows away and the grain comes back down. But we're in the threshing part of the process. The the plant, the cut grain is going to get either beat with sticks, or you would walk on them, or like they would get heavy animals like cattle to walk on them. And sometimes kids would ride behind in like these things that look like sleds, and they would have little stone teeth in them that would help separate the grain from the chaff. It just made it more effective, and the kids would ride and like, yeah, go faster. But it would be very effective to have animals do it, because that just loosens the kernels of grain off of the worthless part of the chaff. And this picture is, well, did they come to gather and take advantage of Lady Jerusalem? No, God brought them just like gathering sheaves, and just like sheaves, they're going to get pulverized. And verse 13, God commands, "Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion." Daughter of Zion's equivalent of what I say, Lady Jerusalem, the same thing. "For I'm going to give you horns of iron. I'm going to give you hooves of bronze. You're going to beat in pieces many peoples. And you're going to devote their gains to the Lord and their wealth to the Lord of all the earth." So you got to hang with Micah. You got to keep up with the biblical writers here, because you're like, wait a minute, is it Lady Jerusalem or is she a cow? Like what's going on here? And this is just for the Hebrew mindset. They don't mind using multiple layers of imagery and pictures. And so, yeah, this is still Lady Jerusalem, but she will be equipped, empowered the same way like a cow or an oxen would be equipped to now handle. And it's a picture of turning the tables. She's not the victim. She's actually there at the threshing floor to pulverize.
Well, I kind of picture
nations.
like the pregnant woman who's in labor and vulnerable, and the gangs are coming, and at the last second she like throws off her disguise and
She's a martial arts.
Yeah.
Lady Shadow.
Lady Shadow, yeah, exactly.
Those of you who watch Studio C. But just kind of what you thought you knew.
Exactly.
What you thought you saw was a vulnerable, you can't get any weaker person. And God goes, "Oh no, you don't know what I'm going to do." Like he supernaturally empowers her to like, while you're giving labor, like karate kick, and it's like, oh, there was more going on there. So
God enables and empowers Lady Jerusalem, like the picture of horns of iron, hooves of bronze indicates her power, her invincibility. God is strengthening her to be unstoppable, and then saying, "Thresh them," and like pounding, just crunch, 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 crunch. And is the grain going to stop an ox from stepping? Like it's basically powerless.
Right. You can't
this
do anything.
Point. But what's interesting to me is this isn't done just so that Israel can go, "Rah, rah, look at how awesome I am. Like I smashed all you guys. I karate kicked you in the face." Like what's the upshot of the end? Like where is it all heading?
Back to the Lord.
Yeah. All of the gain, all of the reward, all of the grain that's produced in this process, to use the picture that Mike is using, is going to the Lord. All of the wealth, whatever, even though Israel's been empowered by God to overcome her adversaries, when this happens, everything they gain from it goes to the Lord. And I think that's it's key.
Almost like as she's punching them, the money, the riches are falling out.
Cha-ching. It's kind of like Super Mario.
Yes.
Coins are flying out.
Yes. And gathering up in the Lord's basket.
Yeah. And it reminds me of, all the crowns in Revelation being given. Ultimately, they're laid at the feet of the Lord. It's all about him. It's all about glory to him. And even though we may be used in certain instances to overturn the tables of things, like it's not about us.
Right.
It's about
we're a pawn.
We're
in
just
a good
a
way.
servant.
Yeah.
So we see here, like Israel, there's a mixed blessing. She's a blessing to the nations, but she's also an instrument of judgment. We're going to see that again in chapter 5. Israel is both a blessing and also an instrument of judgment. She's the repository of God's covenant promises, and yet, she also has to adhere to the consequences when she disobeys those covenants, those covenant stipulations. But in the end, God will redeem her and will strengthen her and use her for his purposes and his glory.
To me, there's so much on the one hand and on the other hand going on here. And a part of me is like, I can't wait to hear all of Micah in consecutive, back to back. Because in reality, we started recording Micah 1
months ago,
February, and it's June. And to just really see, to me, this just seems like a book that, okay, as you understand chapter 1, you'll now see chapter 2. And as you understand 1 and 2, then you can bring in 3. And as you get 1, 2, and 3, then 4. But you've got a little loop here with 3 and 4. And then 5, you've got all like ring composition going back to Leviticus, where there's little rings hooking chapters together, then there's bigger rings, and then there's bigger rings. And this repetition with words and images, they just keep building and getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
And ultimately, though, I like that, I like that verse 12, but you don't know the thoughts of the Lord.
Yeah.
What you're seeing right now, that poor, desperate, vulnerable woman who looks like she's about to be just tortured. It's like, oh, but just wait. God's going to show up in a way you don't expect her to turn into the cow that takes everyone down. But that's what he does. And it's like, okay, there's our hope again. I like ending with hope. There's our hope of that impossible situation, that horrible situation, or just the future you're looking at going, where is everything going? This is where it's going. Israel will be at the center. Jerusalem will be at the center. The king will be reigning, and the nations will be coming in.
Yeah.
And then going to the end of this, all the wealth will be the Lord's.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, that's where my peace is. That's where my hope is. That's where my joy is, regardless of what the news says, social media says.
Right.
So, any other thoughts?
You summed it up well.
So then, this is the context and color of the Bible podcast. Come back next week. We'll go into chapter 5, which is still more that hope feeling. But don't forget, we do have social media. We use social media to help spread the kingdom, get this word out, because really that's what we're trying to do. We can start with what chapter 4 talked about, the nations coming to Jerusalem. Bryan said it last week. We can start practicing and preparing for that now by our studying, by teaching others, by taking this word out and going, I've got good news for you. I've got hope. I've got peace. I can tell you where to turn to get it. So thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.